When you think about what it takes to build a civilization, what comes to mind? Huge monuments, mighty armies? Well, what if the real blueprint was something else entirely? Today, we're going to dive into the incredible infrastructure projects from the time of Umar ibn al-Khattab, and we're going to see how roads, canals, and entire cities weren't just about engineering, they were the physical embodiment of a spiritual vision. And it all comes back to this one single principle. This teaching from the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, established leadership not as a position of power, but as a sacred trust, a deep, profound responsibility. And this wasn't some feel-good quote, it was the actual blueprint for every single road that was paved and every city that was planned.
So where do you even start when you're trying to build a society on a principle like that? You start at the heart of the community, the places of worship. The very first projects weren't about trade or defense, they were about creating sanctuaries for the soul.
Take the Prophet's mosque in Medina, for example. Ahmad oversaw a major expansion. But look, the goal here wasn't just bigger is better. It was all about making it more comfortable and more focused for worship. The dirt floor? It was paved with stones, making it cleaner. A stuccoed roof was added to protect everyone from the rain. Practical, thoughtful changes.
And just to give you a sense of the scale here, the expansion pushed out 10 cubits toward the Qibla, the direction of prayer. A very deliberate extension of the most sacred part of the space.
And then, get this, a massive 70 cubits towards the north. This was no minor touch-up. It was a huge project, designed from the ground up to make sure a growing community had room for everyone. But here's what's so fascinating. Despite all these practical upgrades and the massive expansion, there was one very strict rule. Umar absolutely forbade any kind of fancy, lavish decoration. Why? Because the whole purpose of the mosque was focus and prayer, not distraction. It was all about function and faith, not extravagance.
Okay, so from that spiritual heart, let's follow the economic arteries of the state. If the mosque was the soul, then these new trade routes were the lifelines, designed to nourish the entire body of the growing community.
Here's a perfect example of this in action. There was an old waterway that connected the Nile River to the Red Sea. It had been completely neglected by the previous rulers, basically just filled in with sand. Omar heard about it and immediately ordered his governor in Egypt to dig it out again. And the result? It was a game changer. A direct channel for trade that brought vital food supplies and prosperity right into the heartland of Islam.
And the name they gave it, it tells you everything you need to know. The Channel of the Commander of the Faithful. This wasn't just another public works project. No, it was directly tied to the Caliph's vision and his personal responsibility to provide for his people.
But it wasn't just about economics or military strategy, not at all. The infrastructure being built was also a kind of social safety net, embedding compassion right into the physical landscape.
Check this out, an institution called Dar ad-Daqiq, which literally means the House of Flour. These were set up all along the travel routes, and they were stocked with flour, dates, and raisins, specifically for travelers who got stranded, or just any guest who needed help. Think about that, a state-sponsored system to make sure nobody was left behind. And here's the crucial part. This care wasn't just charity, it was the law. When people who lived near oases got permission to build houses, Umar wrote a condition right into the treaty. The rights of the traveler, the wayfarer, came first. Access to water and shade wasn't a favor they had to ask for, it was their fundamental right. All right, now we get to what might be the most ambitious projects of them all, founding entirely new cities right from scratch. This is where we see all those principles, spiritual focus, economic planning, social compassion, all coming together in one single, meticulously planned blueprint.
So why build brand new cities? Well, the goal was to go way beyond just having temporary military outposts. It was about creating permanent centers where, as the sources tell us, Islamic life could be lived out in a complete sense. These were meant to be model societies, where the values of the faith were literally reflected in the layout of the streets.
And you have to understand, this physical act of building, of shaping the land, was seen as nothing less than the fulfillment of a divine promise. The authority to build and govern was understood as a sacred trust from God, given to those who believe and do good. In that sense, city planning was an act of faith.
Now, the development of these cities wasn't always a straight line. In places like Koofah and Basra, the first homes were built quickly, out of reeds. But then a massive fire ripped through and destroyed them.
So the people asked for permission to rebuild, and Umar granted it, allowing them to use much more durable adobe bricks. It shows a really practical, responsive approach to a community crisis.
And when I say the planning was detailed, I mean incredibly detailed. Just look at these specs for Koofah. The main roads were designed to be 40 cubits wide, secondary roads were 30 or 20, and even the narrowest alleys had a standard width of 7 cubits. The sources actually describe these wide roads as being like lungs in the body, ensuring the whole city could breathe and stay organized.
But here's that critical balance again. Even as they're laying out these huge organized cities, Omar's instruction was crystal clear. Build what you need. No more than 3 rooms, but do not compete with each other in building extravagant, lofty buildings. He was constantly reminding them that their success, the very authority they had, came from sticking to the prophetic way, the sunnah, not from building worldly palaces. So when you pull back and look at the big picture, you start to see this really powerful theme emerge. Every single piece of infrastructure, every mosque, every canal, every city street, was part of one unified project.
You know, in an eloquent sermon, Umar himself referenced this very verse from the Quran. And the entire purpose of these massive projects was to enact this command, to bring people out of the darkness, of isolation, of scarcity, of insecurity, and into the light of a connected, just, and prosperous society, all while remembering who these blessings came from.
And that right there is why in every single new city that was founded, Koofah, Basra, and the others, the very first thing planned, the building at the absolute center, was always the mosque. The spiritual heart was the physical heart. It was the anchor that the entire community was built around.
And that really leaves us with a pretty powerful question for ourselves, doesn't it? The infrastructure of that era was a direct physical reflection of what that community valued most: faith, compassion, justice. So if we look around at our own world today, at our cities, our roads, our public spaces, what do they say about what we truly value most?